Hey guys, it's Steve here from CG Geek with an exciting Blender tutorial. So you know that scene that's at the beginning of every action movie trailer nowadays, where it's panning over this large city in the evening as the sun is setting? You don't? Well, forget it. I'll just show you. So that is a scene we'll be creating. We'll be creating a large city landscape all within Blender. So using the OpenStreetMap add-on, we'll be creating this realistic city all within Blender, adding materials, rendering, adding details, and depending on how much detail you need, you can always add more or less. It should be a lot of fun, and yeah, if you need a city, this is the tutorial for you. So if you want to download the finished city blend that I have right here, you can do that over on my new Patreon page. For the $3 perk, you get access to all the finished blend files on my YouTube page. So if you had any sort of need for the city and couldn't create yourself or whatever, you could go over to my Patreon page and for just $3 a month have access to every single finished tutorial file on my YouTube page. You'd also get entered into the GTX 980 Ti giveaway, so you might want to check out my new Patreon page over there. But now on to the tutorial. So we're going to be using a website called OpenStreetMaps. Basically, it's a website where you can choose a section of a map, save that to your desktop, and then open it and import it right through Blender. So you want to switch over to your web browser now, and here we're going to go to openstreetmap.com, or .org. There'll be a link in the description. So go to OpenStreetMap, and then from here you're going to type a place that you want on basically the entire world that you want to take your section of city from. So I just picked New York because I've seen the most of that in movies and whatnot, and it seemed like a cool place to recreate. So you type in New York and you hit search. Right here we have New York. I'm just holding Alt and scrolling out to zoom out a little bit because I was way zoomed in there. And I found that the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan Bridge area here was a really cool place. So this is where you're going to want to select for your export. So to do that, you're going to click Export up here, and then you're going to go manually select a different area. Here you get this box. I'm just going to drag it in because you have to be careful not to select too much. If you select too much, it's going to take forever or maybe not work at all within Blender because this is a little bit crazy amount of buildings. So I'm going to go nice and small just so I can get decent speeds, and we can always add more buildings later. So just a section like that, right around Wall Street and the Brooklyn Bridge. It looks good. So then you're going to go export. And you'll see it takes a little while to think about it. And if it works, I've had it not work, but most of the time it works, you'll have it just immediately start downloading. So I'm just going to give this a second here. You can see it working up there and down here. And if it works, it's going to immediately start downloading. Alright, and there it goes. We have it downloading right there, and it's usually just around 5 megabytes or so, depending on how big your selection is. So I'll let that go real quick. So go ahead and download that. I already have it downloaded here, so I can go ahead and open it up in Blender. But first, we need to enable some add-ons. So to do that, go User Preferences, Add-ons, and then we're going to enable OpenStreetMap. So start typing OpenStreetMap, you'll see it right there. Enable that, and while I'm in the Blender user preferences, I'm going to go ahead and enable Node Wrangler because this is awesome and I will definitely need it later on for materials. And then I'm also going to enable images as planes because that one is handy as well. So go ahead and check that box right there and you're good to go. So now within Blender, what we can do is go File, Import, and we're going to go OpenStreetMap. So do that, find where your map is. I have it right here in my folder here, but go ahead and find where your map is. It's in your downloads folder, and it'll be called map.osm. Go ahead and click Import OpenStreetMap. Now this takes a while. Blender takes a while to kind of calculate the entire map and decide how much it, whatever. Maybe it's not fully optimized or something, but it just takes a while. It's taken up to like 5 minutes for me. So be patient and let it take its time. Depending on how big your selection was, this may take longer or less. But go ahead and do that. And you can see I only have import buildings checked over here. You don't need any of these other settings. The roads and paths and stuff, they just don't really work in this situation very much. So you can just ignore all those settings but the import buildings. You want that one, so make sure that one is checked. because that is going to do most of the hard labor for us right there and start us off with a great base mesh to work off of. So as that goes, I'll leave you guys and hop back as soon as that finishes. And here we go. So that took about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And if I scroll out here, you see we have a huge city. Now I can't even see the whole thing because it's being clipped off in Blender's viewport. So a few things we can do is, first of all, we can scale these buildings down because they're super huge and we don't need them that big in our Blender scene. But another thing you can do, just in case you wanted to, is in your Properties tab here, you can see we have clip under our view settings. And if you increase the clip, you increase the view distance. So go ahead and do that. We'll give that like a 2500 or something. But then we'll also hit A to select all of our buildings there. And I think we'll scale them down to about a 0.2. Alright, that's a little bit more like it. So now you can see we have our city. And that's pretty amazing. It's amazing. You can see all these buildings are so cool looking and just already here and ready to be used. Now there's a bit of mesh cleanup that needs to be done, but besides that, it's a really great start to our city. As you can see, it did all the difficult parts, and it's already laid out by roads and everything else. If you look at it from top view, you can see all the buildings are distributed just the way they would be in real life. So it's awesome. Alright, so to kind of clean up the geometry first, before we really get into it, I want to hit A and select all of our buildings here and go Control J. This will make them all one single mesh, so now I can do a whole bunch of batch changes to all of them. Now I don't need this cube, so I'm going to go ahead and tab into edit mode, select that cube, and just get rid of it. X, delete vertices. Alright, now tab back out of there. So what we're going to do to kind of clean up the mesh is I'm going to hit tab, and then with everything selected, so hit A to select everything, I'm going to go remove doubles, and you can see it removed 13,660 vertices, so that's awesome. I just cleaned up a lot of duplicates that we didn't need, and then under shading and UVs, click recalculate the normals. And you can see that kind of flips some of the faces where they might have been pointing the wrong direction, and just gives us some cleaner looking buildings. Now in some spots you might see something like this, and that's basically where two faces are intercepting with each other. And it's not a huge deal, but it can sometimes give you kind of glitchy renders or whatever. So what I did is just kind of move some of these faces around a little bit. If you grab something like that, move it up just a hair or down just a hair, you might be able to clean up, depending on which face it actually is. Maybe I need to select that one there and just drop it down a little bit. I'm not seeing it make a difference in that case, but maybe over here, if you try moving that in a little bit, you can see it kind of cleans that up. So just move that a tad. And it'll fix that face down there. Alright, I'm just holding shift to move it less. And then this face here as well. There we go. As long as they're not intercepting, it'll look a lot better. So anyway you see that, not all these buildings will even be noticeable, but if you have one of those like in your scene and it's annoying you, you can kind of fix it by moving the faces around a little bit. Alright, so now what I'm going to kind of do first, before finishing like the modeling and details, is I'm going to do the materials. Because the materials is something that can be done at this stage without going any further. First off, I think I'll drop my whole mesh down to that red line there. So I'm just in front view here, and I'm just sliding it straight down so it's along that line. Alright, cool. So to do the materials, what we first have to do is we kind of have to unwrap all these buildings. So I'm going to do it all at once. I'll be duplicating these buildings across to give even more buildings in the distance. But I want to do the materials first before going to that step. So I'm going to select everything, go U, and go Smart UV Project right there. And you have some settings here. The default ones should work fine. You click OK, and you're going to have to wait a little while because this is a lot of buildings to calculate, and it might take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute or so. I've had it take even longer, but I'm hoping in this case it doesn't take too long, so we'll see. Okay, wow, that took more like 5 to 10 minutes. So I have kind of a large city here, even larger than you need, because like I said, we'll be duplicating some buildings. So if you're having problems with lag or taking too long, go ahead and make a smaller selection and don't do it quite this big, because you might have some longer wait periods. But we got it done now, so I can split my view here now, and we should be able to see. Let me just drag that over right there by clicking in the corner, and then go to the UV image editor. There you go. All of our buildings unwrapped crazy in that huge map there. Awesome. Okay, so let's create our first material. So first off, we're going to switch to Cycles Render because we're not rendering in Blender. We're rendering in Cycles. We'll get much better results with that in this case. Alright, so then I'm going to split my window again. I shouldn't have closed it because I'll be using the node editor. Here we go. Let me hit N to close off the Properties tab there. And give myself a little bit more space. So let's start off with kind of a main building here. In fact, it might be good to quick place our camera just to kind of give us an idea of what the focal points of the buildings will be. So kind of zooming in here, I'm going to go Alt-Control-0. And that'll place our camera right around that selection, a little too close. If I grab it again now and hit 0 to be in camera view, I can go G and kind of pull out. And as you can see, we have the same clipping issue there. So I need to go over to my camera settings now and change the clipping to be like 2500. Awesome. Now we can see all the buildings in the background. So that's a pretty good angle right there, actually. I think I got it pretty great the first time. I'll pull it back just a little further maybe to see a few more of those buildings. Maybe go a little lower. Something like that looks pretty sweet. Alright, so we have this area with like where the river will be, and that kind of adds another aspect to the city, because the city is never just buildings. You'll have like rivers or whatever, usually running around or through or next to a city. So that kind of adds to the illusion and niceness of the scene. Niceness? It adds to the artisticness of the scene, I guess, not niceness. So with that done, let's go ahead and add the materials for this building right here. So as you can see, the OpenStreetMap already gave us 3 materials. One called the roof, one called the wall, etc. Although it doesn't really seem to be that accurate, because the roof material, if I go ahead and select just the roof material, you can see it's all the red ones. So it's not exactly what we need. So we can't really use these materials for much more than separate buildings, but I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll start off by changing the material for the wall buildings. Let's go ahead and rename that though to just building 2. Alright, and go ahead and click use nodes. We have our nodes pop up over here. And now I'm going to add in a texture. So to do that, I'm just going to hit Control T, because I already have the node Wrangler add-on in the system preferences turned on. So I can use that shortcut and it'll automatically do that for me. So that's why you want to enable node Wrangler. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and open that texture then. That will be, let's see here, I have a handful of them here. Again, links in the description. But I think this one will be, let's go with this building right here. This one's cool looking. So kind of a basic looking brick building with some windows in it. If we go rendered, you can see they are spread way too far apart. The windows, you can't even see them. So that's why we're going to take the scale here and crank it to something crazy. We'll go 150 first on both of these. And you can see, whoops, I didn't get this one to 150. There we go. You can see, there we go. We got a whole bunch of nice building windows. That might even be too many. So maybe I'll go 12, 120. There we go. That might be a little bit more accurate. And then you can kind of change the location along the Z here. So the windows might not be overlapping the corners. I'm sorry, I think it's the Y that I need to change here. Yeah. Pick something like that, maybe 2.4, where the buildings are going to the top, but not any further. So maybe 2.45 would be perfect. Yeah, that's about right. So you can see the buildings' windows are not overlapping the top too much. And that looks pretty nice. But we need to work on the materials a bit, because the reflections and stuff, there's nothing there yet. Before I get into that, though, if I set up a lamp, I'll be able to see the reflections a bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the lamp here that is in your default scene, drag it up, change it to sun, click use nodes, and here we'll set up a few sun properties. We'll change the size to be very small, like a 0.02. And then the strength, we'll crank that up to like 5. And then the color, we want to be a very late evening orangish, purplish, pinkish color. Something like that. Yeah, I find to be cool. Alright, so now we can kind of rotate the sun. If I scale it up, you can see a little bit more of how it's positioned. I'll rotate it so it's kind of facing towards the camera and on an angle. Something like that. If we go top view, you can see better which direction it's pointing. I want to point it this way a little bit more. So just kind of coming over the river there. And that should do a pretty decent job of sending light into our scene. If we go rendered now, You can see we have the nice shadows coming across our buildings. Cool. Now, one other thing I need to do is set up an HDR so we can see kind of the reflections in these buildings. So go to your world settings, choose use nodes, background. We're going to choose environment texture by clicking that dot there, going environment texture, and then open up the HDR. Again, link in the description where you can download this particular HDR file. I'm going to use this JPEG file actually though. No, actually use the HDR. We'll see what that looks like. I wasn't sure what I used in the final tutorial, but this one should work. Okay. So go ahead and stick that in the background there. And then we kind of have to rotate this background around a little bit to get it lined up. So switch over from material nodes here to the world nodes. And that's how you edit the environment maps. So here we have our, oops, I don't want to do that. So we have our environment texture. If you just go Control T, it'll add the mapping node and texture coordinate node that we want. And we can kind of rotate this around our axis. So I want to rotate around the Z. Whoops, no I don't want to rotate around the Z. That's the location. The rotation right here. Rotate it until you can see the sun. And the sun is right there. Blinding sun. Put that in the right spot, right about over there. So it's sending light in the same direction that our sun lamp is. Cool. And now we can kind of move this HDR down a little bit actually. Something like that. And I think it will look just a little bit better. So there we go. I think we can rotate that off to the side a little bit more still. Right around there should do it pretty good though. Okay. And then maybe rotate it this way a little bit just to kind of pitch it upwards a little bit. We don't want the sun coming from underneath though, so somewhere around there, as long as you have the sun over there, it doesn't matter because this won't be our actual background. So there we go, and that should do a pretty decent job. What else is there? I think that should do it for now. We can leave those settings as is, and we'll tweak them later if we need to. So what I'm going to do next is work on this texture a little bit more, now that we have reflections and stuff. So what I want to do is, first of all, you can see that the windows are being cut off a little bit side to side there. So switching back to my material nodes here, I'm going to change the location along the X a little bit. And tweak that until we fix that. There we go. Fix that pretty nice. Now what I want to do in the materials is I want to take the windows and make them slightly reflective, but not the bricks. So to do that, let me think for a second. I'm going to add in a color ramp. So to do that, you just go Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp. And then we're going to connect this to the color texture here, right into the factor. And then if I go Control Shift, left click, I can click on that node and we can see exactly what the color ramp is looking like. So you can see it's a black and white image right now. If I bring the blacks up, real nice there. Oh, new activity in my Blender tutorial. Cool. And I bring the whites down. Or I mean, I guess I'm bringing the whites up, but basically I can get it to the point where the windows, where they're open, are bright white, and everything else is black. So you can see by pulling that around, I can adjust my color ramp to be exactly what I want. So I don't really need to change the white, pretty much just the black. So these areas here might actually be emitting light, and not so much reflective. So I could add light emissions to that, but it's not so late in the day that you would really be able to tell. So I'm not going to bother with that. And I'm going to make my blacks a little bit brighter, just so you can see more of the windows. Alright, so something like that. Something like that looks pretty nice, I think. Right around there. So it's pretty much just the windows selected. And now I'll add in a glossy node. So Shift A, Shader, Glossy. And then I'm going to add in a mix node. So Shift A, Shader, Mix node. Connect the diffuse to the top, and the glossy to the bottom, and the color ramp as the factor. So with that done, we check out what that looks like, and you can see that the windows are more glossy and the bricks aren't. So that is okay, and I think looks a little bit better, but is not perfect yet. We need to tweak, first of all, our glossiness. This has to be a little bit more straight reflective. So you can see the reflections a little sharper in them. That looks better. And then secondly, I want to add some freshnel, they call it. Freshnel, I think it is pronounced. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's an input Fresnel shader. And this is going to help determine at what angles the buildings facing the camera is going to shine a reflection or not. Because you can tell when you hold an object, if it's kind of facing the light, it will shine more than if it's turned away. Basically, a reflective surface kind of works that way, depending on how the light's hitting it. So to do that, I'm going to use a Fresnel, I guess, and add in a color mix and multiply. Let's see, multiply might be what I need. And then drag the Fresnel into the bottom. So if I show you what the Fresnel looks like, you can see where the values are different depending on how the light is hitting them. For example, this building back here is nice and bright, and then darker basically works depending on how the light is hitting it. So this is going to help add some realism to our reflections. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply that. No, I think I want a screen. No, multiply. Multiply looks right, in my opinion. So go ahead and do that, and you can see how it kind of affects these buildings to look a little different. Let me see what a screen looks like. Maybe I want a screen, actually. I think screen might look a little better. No, because this is I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself right now, but because the reflections are only in the windows and not on the bricks, we want it to be multiply. Awesome. So that is looking a bit better now. If I switch here, you can see it's looking even more realistic. And then the last thing that I want to do is add a little bump. So converter, vector bump. And this is just going to be the windows here. Because we wouldn't be able to tell any difference in like the bricks or anything. But the windows we want to have, all right, you can see they're kind of sticking outwards a bit. So I'm going to crank the strength down to about a 0.5 and the distance up to about a 0.2. So we have those windows there then. And then this can just be plugged in to the normals on our nodes here. The Fresnel, the glossy, and the diffuse. All right, so I go Control-Shift onto our last node. And you can see we have some extra detail added. Now I might want to choose invert. That will kind of make it look like the windows are sunken in a bit. Depending on your building, you might want to change that, but I think invert will look a little better. And that's just a little subtle extra detail. And when we have other buildings around, you'll see some of those reflections. And then depending on the building, some might be more completely glass than others. It'll look really good, I think. Okay, so I'm still not sure if I have this Fresnel node set up how I want. But for this particular building, it doesn't really matter. Other buildings that are all glass, I'll just go ahead and use this as a main mix factor. So let's go on and do one of those all glass buildings. I'm going to switch my materials here over to a roof material. We'll call this building 1. Why do I have a Z there? I don't even know. There you go, building 1. Click use nodes, and let's just actually grab building 2 and then hit that 2 right there to make it its own material. And then we can delete the 001. So it's building 2. Cool. And then building 1, actually this has to be building 1, I'm sorry. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new city texture. So go ahead and let's pick one that's all glass here, like this one or this one. They look pretty cool. And you can see it adds some blue to our scene. But using one of these now, I'm going to change my color ramp here. I don't want it to be so much black because there's a lot more glass on these. So pull it way back, and let's get a lot more of the glass showing. And actually, it looks like the glass is slightly darker on these, and the metal is brighter. So I'm going to click the little flip there to make it flipped and inverted, basically. So now I can pull the blacks up, and now I have the windows white and the trim that is not window black. So that looks pretty cool. And we'll make that the factor for our mix node here. And you know what I'm going to do? I should have done this earlier, and I might change my other material. But instead of having this mixed to here, because I'm not sure I like the multiply adding that to it, I'm actually pretty sure I don't. I'm just going to add another glossy node. So go ahead and do that. Add another glossy shader. Just duplicate your mix in your shader. Connect the mix to the top, the glossy to the bottom. And then this will be the factor of our new mix node. Alright, so now we have 2 glossy nodes being added. And depending on the light angle, you can see that glossy being added nicely. Alright, so that's pretty sweet. Let me quick check how just this node looks like with the main glossy added here. And I think it looks pretty good. With all of these materials, we can come back and kind of tweak the colors by dropping in like a hue saturation. But until I have all my buildings in, I don't want to change too many of them. Alright, so there's two different building materials set up. Let's go ahead and change the colors in the viewport here. Settings, you can go ahead and change this to more of a bluish color. This one is a little bit more of a brownish color. And this is going to be the same process for every material. I'm going to go ahead to the next material, change it to building 1. Click that checkbox to make it its own, and we can rename it building 3. I have like 6 textures. I don't think I'll show the process for every one because it's pretty much the same. I'll change this color to be whatever texture we choose. Let me check here. Alright, let's go for this white one here. Add a little variation. So give this viewport color kind of a whitish look too. And then let's choose what buildings we want this material on. So to do this, I'm just going to tab into edit mode and hit L when I find a building that I want the material changed on. So I'm just doing this on a few buildings, hovering over it and hitting L every once in a while, just creating it pretty random. Picking up buildings that I think should have the white material. Alright, so I'm just going to grab a handful. This doesn't need too many. A lot of these are attached. If you wanted to go in and actually separate them, you can do that too. But I think when I remove doubles, actually, kind of attach some of these, which I probably should go back and change just some of the faces anyways to a different material. But I'm going to select a handful like that. Not that one. Something like that. And go assign. You can see the colors will change to white, and then when I go rendered, they will have the new material applied to it. So cool. And we can tweak the material shader for these if the blacks look a little harsh on this material now. Pull them back a little bit. And the freshnel, I'll just leave that for now, I think. But yeah, you can change the roughness on these two. If your reflections are too sharp, this will change how sharp the reflections are. I think the reflections on the freshnel shader should not be quite as sharp as the ones in the windows. So this will be more of a 0.1, and the windows can be a 0.02. So I think that look is going pretty well. Now I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, do 3 more, or maybe just 2 more material buildings here. The same process, just adding in a new texture and tweaking it a little bit. And then I'll jump back with you guys because I don't want to bore you with the same thing over and over again. So let me get cracking on that. Alright, so I went ahead and added 2 more building materials, and you can see we have some more variation here. We're getting a bit of noise due to the amount of reflections, but that's okay because we can reduce that later. Also, you can see the reflections are working quite nicely. On, say, this building here, you're getting some reflections, and the buildings are interacting with each other nicely. So all in all, it's looking pretty decent. If you wanted to kind of reduce the harsh reflections, turning the roughness up a little bit, I think will help, so they're not quite so sharp. If you don't need the super sharp reflections, go ahead and turn it up a little bit on some of these. Otherwise, just leave it and we'll reduce it later somewhat too. But I think that's pretty good for the materials. Now, like I said, it seemed like some of these buildings kind of got attached to each other when we removed the doubles. So what I've kind of been doing, and I need to continue doing a little bit more of, is when you have something like this, and you can't select it all because you hit L and everything gets selected, what you can do is you can come in and just kind of manually select. So I'm going to grab a face or hit period to zoom in on that face there. And you can see this is what we have. Now I'm just going to turn off the this view here. It shows the vertices behind the faces. Turn that off. And I'm just going to select all these faces by hand. It's a little bit cumbersome. You can hold C down and do it a little bit faster. But go ahead and grab all those. Cool. And then click assign on whatever material you want. If I turn the preview on here, you can see, you can't really see it's all glossy. But go ahead and assign, say, that one to it. And you can see when we switch that to rendered, we have a different material. Or is that the same material I just added to it? It doesn't look that much different, so I might try Command Z, try this building here. There we go. And if we go rendered there, now we can see we have, it still looks very similar. Maybe some of these buildings are too similar, and I could change that a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and Command Z that again, and give that, tab into edit mode. Whoops, where did I go? Okay, back here. Select that again, not those back there. And let's try this time, let's try giving it the brick material, just to make sure this is working, because this is kind of weird. Alright, that changed, and then rendered view. Yeah, okay, so you can see we can kind of change the materials around a little bit. I don't know if I want this one in particular, but Command C, assign that one. So like I said, some of these seem a little similar, maybe more similar than we want. So what you can do, like I said earlier, is you can drop a hue saturation node in. So let me just kind of grab those and move them back, and then go color, Shift A color, hue saturation. And here I can kind of make a building darker maybe, and even change the hue a little bit to give it a different color, although this one isn't really changing too much. Maybe it's because it's too much reflectiveness. So check the reflectiveness, and yes, it looks like it's a lot of reflections. So to turn it down, you can just take the white value and crank it a little bit black. And that right there will turn down the reflections quite a bit. You can see you get less reflections. So we might need to do that too on some of these buildings. But that is not too bad. Let me see. If a tab into edit mode, select. Okay. We could add a few more sections of this kind of building to here too by holding Alt and Shift clicking. Select a ring. Go ahead and add maybe building 5 to it. Alright. Let's see what building 5 looks like on that. Okay, and it's a different window material there. And it just kind of gives it a little bit more variation, like you'd see in a city. So you can do as much of this as you want. Like some of these buildings up here look cool if the window design changes. So go ahead and select those. That one doesn't want to be selected. Come on, select you. Hit period, because that helps to just get in there and select what you want more detailed. So I'm going to go ahead and select these across here. Hit C. There we go. Not you back there. Cool. And we can give this one, let's say, building 1 material. Building 4. Okay. And if I get rendered, you can see we have a different window texture up there. Also, as you can see right here, maybe some of the textures need to be repeated more than others. So for example, this one I might take up to 150 by 150. And you should see the windows repeating just a little bit more on there. Cool, maybe a little bit more still though, because it's not changing as much as I'd like. Right, did that change? It's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, that should be changing it. But there you go, we have this colorful looking city. It's coming along quite nicely though. And yeah, like I said, as much of the materials as you feel like tweaking to add more variation is good. Let me kind of add those, give that, and so forth. But that's going to do it for the tweaks that I'm going to make right now, because I need to move on to some other things. So we'll leave it at that for now, and we can always tweak them later. So I'm going to go rendered, and you can see we have our city below us. And what I want to change now is I first want to go into my material settings here and choose color management. And I'm going to choose this render here to film. If you change it to film, you'll get some more crushed blacks and a filmic look. And that's kind of what I'm going for. So that looks pretty nice. And that should do it for that. So what I need to do for the tops of the buildings to add just a little bit more detail is I want to add a particle system and add some just smaller building things, sort of like what we have right here already added, but just more of them, because it adds more realism to it. So to do that, I need to separate the tops of the buildings first, because they also kind of need their own material, don't they? So to do that, I'm going to hit Tab, C, and then Select. And you can see by doing this, we're selecting only the tops of all these buildings. So that should do it pretty well. Let's get all of them. So if I'm doing it from the top view and I have this turned off right here, if I just zoom out, hit C, I can select all the tops of the buildings, like so. And now I'm going to hit Y to separate them, and then P to separate by selection. So now if I tab into edit mode, you can see I have my buildings, but then I can also select the faces here, and these are all the rooftops. Sweet! Okay, awesome. Now I need to quick change the material for those. They obviously have all the different materials right now, and they need to have their own materials. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the building materials on these, leave just one material, and I'll actually take that one out too and add a new one. This is just going to be a basic concrete material. So to change it to concrete, I'm going to, wait a minute, did this change? No, it's just the tops. Cool. So I'm going to give it a color, image, texture right there. And you can see doing this is just changing it over here. It's just the same as doing it over here. You can do it over here or over here. It doesn't matter. Let me go ahead and go Control T to add in our mapping node, and then open up a basic concrete texture. So I have a whole bunch of textures here. I'm just going to grab a concrete bear here. Again, link in the description if you want to grab it. You can do that. But then I'll just drop in a hue saturation so I can kind of tweak the intensity of this. Where do we have it here? Right there. Between the image texture and the diffuse. And now if I go rendered, you can see we have a different material for the tops of the buildings. Now I did the hue saturation because I want to take the value down a little bit on it, darken it a little bit more, and then obviously it needs to be repeated quite a bit, so I'll go 100, 100 on that. And that will give us some more detail on the top of our roofs. Cool. And just like the buildings, you'll want to create some varying types. So what you can do in this case, because it's always going to be a face for the top of the roof, is you can go select random. And then we're going to go plus, new material, choose this material to be the same as material 1, and then click the little checkbox. So we have to tab out of edit mode. Check the little checkbox there, tab back into edit mode, and click assign. Now we can change the viewport color, and you can see that these all are different now. So I can give it a different texture if I wanted, or I can just kind of tweak the value and the hue to give it its own look as well. So I'll just do that in this case. And when I go rendered, we'll have some different looking rooftops. If I want to make it extreme, you can see I make it black, and some of them are different. So cool. I'll darken that up just a little bit more so you can see the difference between two of them. But it's looking pretty good. So now another reason that I wanted to separate these is, like I said, because I want to add the extra detail. So to create some of that extra detail, I need to create some basic buildings real quick. Now to do this, I'm just going to jump to layer, the bottom layer there. I don't know what layer that would be considered. Go to front view by hitting 1 and then 5 to go into orthographic mode, they call it. Shift S, cursor to center. Shift A, and in a cube. We'll scale this cube down a little bit to scale it 0.5. So scale it in half. How come it's not scaling? What's this? I accidentally checked that, and I don't want it. Manipulate center points. I don't need it. So scale 0.5. And then drag it up. So I'm just going to tab into edit mode first because I want the origin point, the little dot, to be at the base of my little building thing here. Building thing is what I'm calling it. So go ahead and do that, and then go to top view, and scroll around to find it there. All right. Now in edit mode, I'm going to grab this side face here. Where do we have it? Right there. And just extrude it out a bit, and then maybe I'll add a bend in it. So grab that face, hit extrude, and pull it out a little bit. And we have kind of a unique little strange looking building. But that's all we need. So I'm going to use that. I'll go ahead and texture that because when I duplicate it, the texture will stay with it, and that'll be good. So go ahead and Smart UV Project. Awesome. And then let's add its own little material for this. So I'm going to go Materials, New. This can be a super basic material. I might throw a texture on it, so go Control T. Open up a texture here. Let's just do some of these brick buildings, because you see more brick on these small little buildings, I think. Something like that is actually not too bad. I might just have to change the location here a little bit till I find something that looks semi good. Just mix around a little bit. I'm not going to be picky because these are going to be very hard to see. Something like that, and then maybe change the Y as well. Okay, that looks okay. It doesn't matter. That'll be fine. All right, awesome. And then for the top here, grab those 4 faces, and you guessed it, we're gonna open up that roof material. Material 1. We should really name this though. Concrete. So we know what it is. All right, so go ahead and assign it. If we change the viewport color, we can see that that's the concrete up on top. Let me change it just a little bit more. Cool. And if I go rendered now, right there, you can see we have that little concrete on top. That needs to be tweaked though, so I'm going to hit that little checkbox to make it its own material. And we don't want it to be tiled that many times on this small building. So there we go. Little bit of realism. You can tweak the hue again to make it a little bit more green, or I'm not sorry, green, but reddish. I think I'll go down once. Take the saturation down a little bit too. And the value down, just to match it up a little bit more. Thank you, Leo Stiller, for subscribing. You're awesome. Alright, and the last thing that I want to do is drag and drop in a color ramp here, because I'm not getting the color, I'm sorry, not color ramp, color RGB curves. Right there. Drag it and drop it right in there, and we can give it the reddish texture material I was talking about. There we go. That's more like I'm talking. And then we can take the color down a little bit here as well, just to kind of match. Awesome. And this can be tiled maybe a little bit more than I had it there. It doesn't really matter. It looks like I might have to take the blues down a little bit too, because it's looking a little pinky. And there you go. Simple and sweet. You could add even more details to this if you so desired. Like I could go extrude, whoops, I'm sorry, inset, so hit I, inset way down, and then extrude that straight up, and give it a little radio tower there. Maybe do that again, extrude, or inset, I'm sorry, inset, and then extrude. Little radio tower. Why not? It's easy enough. And then select those vertices. I made it a little tall. Oops, select them all. There we go. I need to check that just to make sure I'm selecting them all there. Cool, and pull it down a little bit. So you can do little extra details, and every little bit counts, and will make it look nice. So there you go, there you have it. There's our little building. And like I said, now we can duplicate this a few times. Shift D, pull it over. We don't want the little radio tower in every one, so I'll just go ahead and delete it. And we don't need these extra faces here either. So let me just go ahead and delete those as well, and then face that in. Blah, 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 blah. Pretty easy. And then I'll just delete these faces too, because this will be an even simpler building. I'll face that in by hitting F. And what do we have? Well, the texturing got a little messed up, but besides that, it'll be fine. Smart UV project. Cool. Rendered. And it looks fine. Let's just give it its own texture. To give it a little bit of variation. But that is going to do it, guys. I don't want to keep on this too long, because this is basically something that is pretty easy to understand, I think. And you should be able to pick it up. Whoa, I'm sorry. I just changed the wrong texture. See, you guys get me talking, and then I can't pay attention to what I'm doing. Oh, the difficulties. All right, let me go ahead and grab that texture right there. And then if I go rendered, voila. We have a strange looking building, but that'll work fine. So you get the idea of what I'm doing here, guys, and you should be able to do the same thing pretty easy. Last thing I might do is add in a cylinder. So let me go ahead and shift add a cylinder for kind of like a water tank, maybe. I don't know. It could be. We'll just make that a little concrete cylinder there. So smart UV project, give it the concrete material. Maybe hit that checkbox so we can change the colors to be a little bit more blue and a little less red on this one, just to give some variation. And what do we have? A nice concrete pillar. So that'll do it for the little details, guys. All I need to do for this. And I'm just going to select all of these, go Control G, and add a group. I'll call this group Small Buildings. Cool. And now I'll go ahead and add it to the top of the buildings. So to do that, I'm going to use a particle system. I'm going to click New, and we'll change it to Hair, and then we'll change it down here to Group. Pretty simple if you've ever done this before in the duplicate group. Small building, you guessed it. You can see we have these small buildings. So that makes the size a little bit bigger. Check rotation. And that's right, I might have to rotate these buildings on the side a little bit. So to do this, you just grab the buildings and rotate 90 degrees. So I'm sorry if I'm moving too fast. This is kind of like an extra step that you don't even have to do if you don't want to. So that's why I'm kind of moving a little fast. If you ever have a difficulty, just try pausing the video and watching what I do maybe in slow motion. But I'm just rotating those 90 degrees in front view. Okay, and then I want to make it so it emits some. Where do we have this? Maybe I have to choose advanced. There we go. I want to emit it just from the Z location. That's not quite working. I'm sorry. The rotation here come from the global Z. Cool. And that looks like it's working on most of them. Yeah. You can see we have all those little buildings on top. And then actually, what if I go normal? I just need to try and find out. There we go, normal tangent. That will put the rotation to the building. Or at least close enough, it looks like. So that adds those extra little buildings on top, which does quite a bit when it comes to realism. You can, whoops, Control C. You can change the random size right here a bit. And change the amount if you want. The amount we can go up to like 2,000, I think. Whoops, that's 200. 2,000. I'm sorry if you hear the dog barking in the background. They'll stop in a little bit, I'm sure. And if we go rendered now, you can see with those extra added buildings, it just adds quite a bit to our scene. So that is looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and save my Blender file, and we'll move on to adding more buildings. Alright, so let's add some more buildings to the horizon line on our city. So to do this, I'm going to I'm going to close my window just so I have a little bit more room in my viewport here. And I'm going to select a chunk of these buildings. Well, first off, let's add a little more variation to these buildings. A lot of these buildings are all the same color. And we have a handful of materials, so let's use them. I'm grabbing a few of these buildings throughout. And I'm going to make some of these. Not all of these. Let's Shift L to deselect some. Shift L. I'd like just this chunk here. There we go. And there we go. I'm going to give some of these like the bluish material here we have. So assign that to it. And we get some variation to these. Awesome. And then what I want to do is say this whole island here, I'm going to duplicate them, but I don't need them as high quality. So I don't need those extra buildings we added on top. So what I'm going to do first is grab our building layer here, tab into edit mode, select that whole chunk, and hit Shift D. So we have two versions of them. And this version, I'm going to hit P and separate by selection. So we have these buildings still here. Awesome. So I can go ahead and hide these buildings so they're not going to get in our way. I'm just hitting H to do that. And then I need to do the same thing to the rooftops. Otherwise, these won't have rooftops. So grab the rooftops there. Select them in edit mode by just going B, selecting them all. And hit Shift D and P, separate by selection. So we have our rooftops and our buildings. We can hide all of the other rooftops now. And what we want to do for these is we want to delete the particle system. So we don't have those little extra peaks because we don't need that extra detail this far from the camera. Now I can go ahead and grab the rooftops and the buildings and hit Control J and join them all together. Awesome. And now I can unhide everything. But I have this separate chunk of building here to move around and do whatever I want with. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of extend this river out to about here. And then I'll Shift D, rotate them. You can see us doing this because that's where the origin point is at. If I wanted to move that, I could just tab into edit mode, select all these, Shift S, cursor to selected, tab out of edit mode, object, transform, origin to 3D cursor. And then we have our origin right there, just to make it a little more handy. But I can go ahead now and extend the city horizon lines out a little bit, rotating them to give it some more variation. And if I split my window here and switch to camera view, you can kind of see what this is looking like, and it's nice. It's adding the depth to the scene to make it look like it goes on forever. I'm gonna go ahead and rotate these like so. Pull them in there a little closer, and it looks like we have to come out just a little further here as well. So maybe rotate them like that. There. All right, and maybe one more time back there. You can't really tell that it's being repeated, so you're pretty safe in doing that. And as long as you're rotating them so the buildings aren't like a texture of the same building over and over, you should be fine. So there we go. Maybe one more chunk right there. Like so. And I'll rotate it like so. Awesome. So we have our distant horizon. And I think it looks pretty nice. I might be able to move all these down just a little bit. There we go, to kind of center our horizon line there. And our river kind of weaves through our city. Cool. So now if I switch to rendered view, you should see the buildings going all the way back. And it's looking pretty nice. So let's continue. What I want to do now is I want to add in the ground surface to our city. And that is just going to be a basic plane. So I'm just going to go Shift S, cursor to center. Excuse me, Shift S, cursor to center. There we go. Shift add a plane, and we'll just scale that plane up. Something crazy big. Whoa, I think I inverted that actually. Don't want to do that. Scale it up to something like that. Kind of position it over our city. It doesn't really matter. Something like that will work. Cool. Maybe scaling the Y a little bit just to continue it out that way is a little bit. Rotate along the Z so it's kind of even to the camera. And we need a nice horizon line. All right. So now what I'm going to do is give this just a basic rough material. And this material is just roads that kind of weave around. So tab, U, unwrap, and then go to material editor, node editor, and let's just open up that new material. So click new, Control T to add our texture right in there. Whoops. I must have accidentally, I restarted Blender and ended up disabling my add-on. So check node wrangler because we definitely want that, and also images as planes. In case you have restarted Blender, you'll have to do that again. Okay, so Control T, and let's open up the buildings here. Again, link in the descriptione. But open up those buildings. I'm sorry, those roads. And let's change the scale to be something crazy big. We'll just go 50 actually. We'll see what 50 looks like. And go rendered. And these roads, whoa, it's too much. Too much. Let's go 15. And you see that we have this road texture that's just repeated crazily across our ground. But if we go into camera view, you can see it actually doesn't look that bad around the buildings. And because our river is going to be different, I think it will work okay for us. Obviously, if you look carefully like in here, you can see, holy cow, they're going right into the buildings. But for our landscape, you can't even tell. If you needed to go into more detail, you can model roads or whatnot. But I don't need any more detail for this scene. And so I'm using the cheaty method. The cheaty method, and it actually works pretty well. So that will do it for the road. But now we need to quick make our river kind of running through the city. So to do that, it's going to be a separate mesh. I'm going to Shift A, add in just a plane. We'll scale it up, rotate it, and position it right in there. All right. And then to extend it onwards, I'm just going to grab that edge right there, and then holding Control, I can click, and it will just weave along with my mouse wherever I click. Very easy. And then I'll just need to tweak it, obviously, a little bit here. Come back and add in a few more loop cuts with Control R, and just kind of move it around, manipulate it around our buildings nicely. Maybe it gets a little wider right there, gets a little narrower right there. Not bad. Something like that. And then I need to add a subsurf to it. So go Control 2. And I'll add a subdivision surface monitor right in there for you. Sweet. This might have to be extended onwards just a little bit further there as well. Very good. And up here as well, E, extend that onwards. Cool. Now, the one issue at hand is that this intersecting with our city. So what we can do for that is let's give our water some depth. So I'm going to extrude it and pull it downwards. All right. And also let's go ahead and give it its own material, new material. We'll be editing that shortly, but I just want it to look a little different so we can see the difference here. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and pull the river upwards a little bit right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a modifier to kind of cut this shape out of our floor. I'm sorry, not our floor, but our roads. So go modifiers, add modifiers, and this is going to be a Boolean modifier right there. If you've never used a Boolean modifier before, it's very simple. You add it to your mesh, and then you choose what object you want to intersect with it. So this is plane 1. So choose plane 1. Just type plane, and it comes up right there. And if I hit Z, you can see that our mesh here is kind of deformed to it. Alright, and that should actually do it. I think I can just apply that now. Hide our lake. So grab our lake and hide it. And you can see we have that divot where our lake is running through. Awesome. Now all I have to do is unhide my lake by going Alt-H. And I might want to delete the depth from it now. I don't think I need it to be deep anymore. So I'm just going to delete that extra line that I added. Delete vertices. And then drag these down right there. So it's kind of sunken in there just a little bit. And there you go. You have your river running through the city. And it looks pretty nice. It might be a little thin. I could scale it up a little bit. Let me just Control Z a few times to before I applied my Boolean modifier. Right there. Go ahead and add this. Make this a little bit wider. Let's just grab these. I'm sorry, both of them. Pull them out there. Nice. Alright, grab that one too. Pull it out there. Just make this river a little bit bigger and more epic looking. Okay. That's not bad. It's coming in here just a little far, but that's pretty good. Alright, so same deal. You just want to grab your base mesh. Choose your water mesh. Make sure it's working. Yes, it is. Apply it. Grab your water mesh and delete the bottom rows of vertices there. I'm just Alt-clicked the edge to select them all and delete the vertices. Then we can hit L over our mesh, grab it along the Z-axis, and pull it down so it's inside of our divot there. Cool. Now, one thing I just noticed is I don't have my key script running. There you go. Now you can see when I press a key. If I go start display, you can see when I press a key. Cool. So that should do it. Now I just need to add a material to this. Whoops. To this water. So let me see what this is looking like right now. Grab it along the Z. Whoops, I hit it. I'm sorry. Grab it along the Z. Control Z. Grab that along the... Oh, I keep grabbing the wrong mesh. There we go. Grab it along the Z axis. Pull it up a little higher. Cool. So in rendered view now, you see we have our lake. And it looks pretty nice. So to change the material for this, very simple material on our water here. It's going to be a glass node. So just go Shift A, shader, glass. Connect it to the surface. Give it a value, IOR value of 1.333, which is water. And then all we need to do is add some displacement to this water. So to do that, I'm going to add in a color ramp. Where do we have it here? Color ramp. Hit Control T. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, I need to add in a texture. So go texture, noise texture. Connect the color to the factor. And here we can choose our displacement, basically. So I'm going to give this a huge value of like 150 and a detail of like 8. Connect it up to our color here. I'm sorry, not the color, but the normal. So we need to add in a converter bump map, vector bump map, connect it to the height, and connect it up right there. So now when I go rendered, you can see we have that nice water displacement. And I actually think I don't need to tweak it much at all, except maybe give it even more on the scale. So that's looking pretty fine in my opinion. Maybe it's still a little small, something like that. Slight ripple. And then what I found adds a nice bit of detail is duplicating these two nodes. So shift select both of them, shift D. This one is going to be a simpler, not as detailed noise texture. Alright, something like that. Let me go rendered and control shift click it so you can see what it's looking like. There we go. More of like a 15. And then bring the blacks up. There we go. Alright, awesome. Maybe even inverted actually. Cool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this over this one. So our mix, change it to multiply. We don't need clamp. And connect this one to the bottom. So now you can see what it does is adding the black over it. Let's add it to a factor of 1. Adds the ripples only in certain spots where maybe the waves are being blown by the water. So now when you look at the final results, you can see the ripples aren't there across everything, but only in certain spots. And you can turn the amount down by changing the material here, but I think it adds a nice bit of detail. Alright, and maybe give it not quite 100% reflections either, like about a 0.1 to give the reflections a little less sharp. And then for the final thing that I did is I added in an input layer weight. And I used the facing value here to mix in a glossy node. So go ahead and add a shader, mix shader, shader, glossy shader, and connect the glossy to the bottom. Make it a little bit more reflective by going like a 0.02. Give it the same bump map that this has right there. And then connect the facing value as the factor. So what a facing is similar to the Fresnel, but a little different. And if I make this a very low number, you can see it looks black. But if I increase it, it depends on the angle that you're looking at it. But it will be more or less a different color, depending on what angle you're looking at it from. So I'm going to go 0.05 as the factor. And this will just add a bit of the glossiness when you're looking at it at more of a sharp angle. So the glossiness is a little less reflective and a little obviously shinier and not as transparent as the glass. So it adds kind of a nice bit of realism doing that. I can also connect the normal value up to the layer weight as well. Awesome. And that looks pretty good. Once we add our background, it will look great. Speaking about background, let's go ahead and do that because we're almost ready to render. So to add the background, I'm going to go Layers, New Layer, and make this layer Layer 2. Render Layer 1 is going to be Render Layer 1. So go ahead and do that. And then putting my cursor in the background, I'm going to Shift A, add in Images as Planes. This is just a nice looking sky background. I'll give you a link in the description. I'm just going to drop it in the background there, rotate it 90 degrees along the X-axis, and scale it up. Alright, now I also need to rotate 90 along the Y, or Z, I'm sorry. And now we have this. Scale it up so it's big enough to fit the whole scene, and then grab it and pull it to the back. Something like that. Alright, cool. We can kind of rotate it to fit our scene better and scale it so it fits the frame. Again, I think the dogs are barking in the background. I apologize for that. Go ahead and position that nicely in the background. I think our camera needs to be rotated upwards a little bit more too, so we can see a little bit more of that background. Nice. So this background can go ahead and be an emission shader. Shader, emission. Excellent. But we don't want it to actually shine too much light. So what we can do is go to the materials here, and down in the cycle settings, change it to not emit, transmission, or volume scatter, or shadow. But we do want the glossy and diffuse. So we'll leave that, and when we go rendered, you can see we're getting those clouds in the water like we want. This texture is a little bit messed up though. Let me switch to textured view here. Let me see. Right here. Textured view. Should be able to see it. There we go. And I can kind of position my clouds. I accidentally got them upside down. Go figure. I'm just going to double tap R and flip it around. Okay, now we need to rotate it again. Cool. You know what? Clear the rotation. Alt R. Or Alt R. There we go. It just needs to be rotated 90 along the Z. And then rotated 90 along the X. Nope, Y. There we go. We want the sun over in that direction there. Very cool. Now we can scale it until the clouds fit our entire scene. Sweet. Let's kind of pull those darker clouds down a little lower. And I kind of want to go for the rule of thirds here on our camera. So if you want to put up the markers for rule of thirds, you go to composition guides and choose thirds. And that means that I want this line here to be right around the horizon there. So I'm going to position that right there. And then grab it down along the Z a bit. Somewhere like that. Very cool. So now when I go, I can pull this down just a little bit more. Something like that. Awesome. And if I go rendered, we should see our cool landscape in the background and the reflections in the water. And it's all looking very good. I might want to change the reflections in the water to be a little less harsh. That's a little sharp in my opinion. Make them a little bit softer there. Cool. And maybe make these a little softer too. Very good. I might be able to scale this up just a little bit more too so it fits the reflections. Awesome. And I think the lake needs to be lifted up a little bit more. There we go. Right about to the brim. So I go rendered and you can see it looks pretty epic. And our whole scene is coming together quite nicely now. I'm pretty happy with it. Obviously there's going to be a lot of tweaks that you can do to the buildings, adding more buildings, filling in gaps, etc. That's something that you can do when you have the time, obviously. But right now I'm a little pressed for time in this tutorial, so I have to continue. So let's just go on to the rendering and compositing. Okay, so I'm going to quick set up a few render settings here. Under my render settings tab here, let's make this a 1280 by 720 render. That should be plenty good enough. Make it 100% good enough. And then I'm going to go to sampling. And I want to clamp it at around a value of 6. This will take out any really hot noise that we don't want, and it'll take out anything too bright. And let me see here, the sampling, that would be under sampling right here. Let's give it a render of 500. That should be plenty. And then let me quick enable my my GPU rendering. Because I have a GTX 980 Ti, you can render with your GPU, and it will go much faster. So go ahead and do that. I'm going to quick change my sample size a little bit here so it renders a little faster as well. I'm going to go 480 by 240. Like I said, if you have a NVIDIA graphics card, you can render with your GPU. And that reminds me, if you want to enter the giveaway where you can win the GTX 980 Ti over the month of June, go ahead, head over to my Patreon page, and you could possibly win the GTX 980 Ti. So go ahead and do that if you're interested. So I'm going to go ahead and set my settings to that for the GPU rendering, and I'm going to go F12 and render. I need to quick move my sky to layer 2. Select them both. And then under the render layers, this reminds me, you need to change render layer 1 to be on layer 2 like we already did, but then masking layer 1. Awesome. And then the last thing we need to do is enable mist on our final pass here. So check mist, check that, awesome. And then let's set up the mist settings real quick. So to set up the mist settings, you need to go to your camera. I'm just going to select my camera right there, and then go to camera settings here, choose mist. You see this little dot line, there's 2 dots in a line. That is the start and end of the mist. Now to adjust the mist settings exactly, we can go to the world settings here, and you have mist pass. Here we can set the start to be right around 50, and the depth to be all the way to the back. If I hit Z, you can see it through the mesh. Right about there. So right around 800, 900. is going to be good for that. Cool. And then let's add a little bit of depth of field. So with our camera, choose limits, and we'll choose the distance. The distance is measured by this little crosshair you can see on our line here. And wherever that is pointed, it will be in focus. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a distance of maybe 100. And then change the aperture type to f-stop. And let's change that f-stop to like 1.8. Go ahead and add 5 blades for the bokeh blur. And we'll leave it at that. And maybe a little rotation. You might notice it. You might not. Let's go ahead and hit save. And if I switch to rendered view, we should see that depth of field in action now. These buildings in the distance will be a little blurry. We can give it even more if we want. But you don't need to go too much on something like this. Maybe 0.6. 0.4. I'm not seeing it quite enough to my liking. Okay, 0.2. Just so I really want to see it. We go 0.02. There you go. There's some focus. So that's way too much. But you get the idea. I can go 0.2 now. And I should be set. That's looking a bit better. Maybe even too much now. But something like that will do it. And then one more thing in my render settings. I'm going to go ahead and change some of these. I'm going to bring the gamma up a little bit. Brighten that up a little bit. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring the gamma down a little bit. And then crank the exposure up a little bit. That just also helps to kind of crush the blacks and really bring out the buildings. Cool. Something like that looks pretty decent. So I can go ahead and render this now. Save your Blender file. Let's split our window back to being 1. And let's hit F12 to render. And now you watch your beautiful city come to life. Wait, there's an error. I'm sorry. There's always going to be an error too the first time you try and render. No biggie. You just have to choose transparent right there. Cool. Save and render. Now we have a transparent background to add our background sky to. So that's going to do it for the render settings, I think. We should be set, and once this finishes, I'll join you guys again, and we'll finish up with the compositing. Alright, and there is our finished city scene. I mean, it's not finished, but it's pretty good looking for our first render. And it's definitely good enough that we can composite it and call it good. So, let's switch to our compositor. In compositing, we want to choose use nodes and backdrop, like normal. If you've ever followed one of my tutorials, I pretty much do that on most of them. So let's go ahead and check out what that's looking like. Pretty nice, pretty nice. And let's go ahead and add the mist to here. So the mist is usually what I add first, and it's added with a mix node. And you add the mist to the factor value, and then you can change the color of the mist here to make it more of a blue fog over the city. And usually I don't go 100%. And what I like to do to kind of tweak the mist is I like to use a color ramp. So converter color ramp. Drop it right in there. And we can take the white value down a little bit to make it not 100%. Something like that. Looks pretty awesome, I think. Okay, and then the next step is to add the background. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this render layer, and we're going to add in a converter alpha over. Alright, we drop this into the bottom socket there, and convert, multiply. No, I have to change it. I'm sorry. Change it to render layer 1, where our sky layer is. Very nice. Now we also need to add the mist to our backdrop, but I don't want to add it as the same factor. So what I can do is just use the same mix node. Control Z. I can use a mix node to add the fog to it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mix node. And you know what? I have a different idea. This will work just as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add it to it before the mist is added. Alright? But then I'll show you. This will be good. Just go ahead and connect the alpha over to the sky right here. Alright, and then add the mist to it. But you can see what I'm saying by, let me just say that the mist is too heavy on the background. And it just kind of ruins it. It's too much. So what you can do though, is at this point, I believe I can alpha over one more time with the original and then adjust the amount. You see? So I can go something like a little less intense. Something like that is how I want the sky to look. And then I need to kind of adjust the brightness of the mist to match the backdrop. Okay. And the color could be a little bit more misty. Something like that. Maybe you need to add a little bit more mist to the backdrop. But this is our control now for the mist. It's basically just adding the image over it again. Alright, so that is looking pretty cool. You can choose whatever color mist you want. I kind of like a little blue. Let's go a little brighter blue. Yeah, right around there. Awesome. Brighten up the background a little bit more there. Alright, now let's go ahead and add in the... well, let's add a little bit of rays. I had a little bit of sun rays coming in from over here. That looks pretty cool. And I think I'll add those in real quick. So to do that, you're going to use the filter sunbeam node. And this is going to be used in conjunction with a color ramp. So vector converter color ramp. Connect the color ramp to the alpha over node here. And see what that looks like. Very cool. Now I'm going to take the brights way down. So we just have the sky in sight. Drop the sunbeams node in there and crank the ray length up. And then this is basically the X and Y on a value of 0 to 1. So placing it at 0.9 sticks it over here, and then taking the number down sticks it up in the corner there. I'm sorry, increasing the number will stick it up in the corner. So something like that looks really cool. And then if I just kind of push it out of the frame a little bit there, 1.1 should do it. And crank it up a little higher. Make the ray length a little longer. Awesome. Now adding this over our image will give us our ray lengths. Our ray beams, I guess you can call them. Ray streaks. So maybe increase the ray length a little bit more. Drop in a color balance node. Color balance right there. We can give them whatever color we want, mainly by adjusting the highlights, but we'll also adjust the lows. Something epic like that. And then a color add node. I'm sorry, it's a mix node that we change to add. And then drop this in the bottom. Pretty simple, right? So we basically created these rays, and then we just add them back onto our image, and you can see what they look like here. I need to connect it to this one right there. Very cool. They're a little bit sharp, so I might need to, first of all, let's see what they look like brought in a little bit more there. Yeah, that looks a little better. Not moving them out of the frame, but moving them in a little bit. Maybe dropping them a little lower. I'm thinking 8.5 would be perfect. I'm sorry, 0.85, of course. 0.85. Cool. And there you go, kind of coming out from under the cloud there, adding a little extra awesome to the scene. And then you can adjust the amount with this node here. So I'm going to go about a value of 3 or 4 for those. Not going too over the top. Cool. Let's do some color balancing now, and we can almost color good. So I'm going to go converter color balance. Now obviously there's a lot of changes you can do in the node editor, small tweaks, vignettes or what, but I'm not going to focus too much on those because it's really not super important. And I'm more focused on, ooh, this needs to be more of like a 0.99 to avoid that right there. Cool. Alright, and I'm seeing if I can't fix that edge there a little bit. Okay, that's not too bad. I'm still getting a little bit of a weird edge there, but it might just be because it's zoomed in. If I go Alt-V, I can zoom in, or V to zoom out. And there you go, you don't really see it so much. Alright, so just doing a little bit of color balancing now. I like to take the shadows down a little bit by taking this value down a little bit there. Not too crazy, but just a bit. Cool. And then I will take the brights And I want to make these a little bit purpley red, kind of to match the sky color there. All right. And then the shadows need to be a little bit blue to the sky. There's plenty of ways you could color grade this scene. This is just kind of how I worked it out. A little bit of a darker blue, or maybe go a little red here, and then the highlights are going to be kind of that purple blue. I mean, they have to be more the value of the sun, obviously, but something like that isn't too bad. And now the mist is a little overpowering still, a little too high. So I can come over here and crank it down even more. Okay, crank that down a little bit. There. Yeah, a little less of the mist would be good. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit by changing the color here. Down a little bit more. Very cool. And then maybe making it a little darker. Very cool. So there you guys have it. That's pretty much it. I added some glows, I think, but those are pretty easy to add. I think you guys can figure that out. Make that a little bluish. Yeah, I don't really have my other scene here to compare it to. I know that it's a little bit too purpley right now. But kind of matching the highlights there, so a little bit yellower, and the midtones maybe slightly purple, and then the shadows more of a blue. And there, that's more like it. And I think my light rays, my sun rays, I'm not calling them light rays, they're sun rays, need to be a little bit less intense. Very cool. And then brighten that up just a little bit. You can also do some color adjustments in the editor here. Color management. You can bring the exposure up, bring the gamma down, etc. I think bringing the exposure up a little bit is cool though. 0.7. Bring the gamma up a little bit. Alright. My one final thought would be that the distant buildings aren't really matching the skyline yet, and that would be just because this is too bright. Darkening it a little bit helps that. And choosing your color more. Something like that. Yeah, that looks really nice. Alrighty, that should do it, my friend. Maybe make the ray beams even a little longer. And like I said, adding a slight glow over the whole scene is cool, so I'll quick show you how to do that. It's just a basic color, vector, let me see, vector, yes. No, I'm sorry, filter. Filter is what I'm looking for. A filter, fog glow, drag and drop. And then I like to just take the threshold way down on these and have it so it's more of an overall glow to the entire scene. And there we have it. Not quite so intense, but make it a little larger. There we go. So you can see what it looks like before and after. It just kind of brightens that sky, makes it a little bit more intense. You can adjust the factor here, and if you wanted to see what it's looking like alone, you change it to 1, and that is what's being affected right now. So I think I can actually take the threshold down a little bit, so more is being affected, but then take the amount down to maybe a minus 0.5. So that's basically the mix factor. Cool. I can take the gamma down a little bit now. And our scene is coming together. So that's going to do it, guys. Like I said, you could add a vignette or whatnot if you wanted to. But this tutorial is running a little long, so I'm going to finish it there. Oh, and one thing to remember, connect your final node to the composite node so you can save it out if you wanted. But that's going to do it, guys. I hope you had fun following this tutorial. Obviously, the city is not perfect, but that is the concept. That is how you create something like this in Blender. So that's going to wrap it up. Like I said, I have the Patreon page now where you can download all the finished blend files, including this one here. If you want to download it and play with it yourself, You could do that by supporting me with just $3 a month. It's greatly appreciated, but not necessary if you don't have the money, obviously. But yeah, that's going to do it, guys. Check out the Patreon page. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to see your finished results. And that'll do it for me. Keep on blending, and I'll see you later. Bye!